"You can't stay here!" she shouted, and I froze mid-step, my hand still on the worn brass handle of the cabin door, the smell of fresh pine and damp earth swirling around me as the morning sun cut through the mist over Lake Crescent, glinting off the rippling water like shards of glass. The gravel crunched sharply under my boots as I glanced up at Karen Whitmore standing rigid on the porch, phone clutched in her hand, her face flushed with that familiar mix of indignation and self-righteousness. I took a deep breath, the cool air carrying the faint tang of wood smoke from the neighboring cabins, and tried to steady the racing thoughts in my head, remembering the long drive along Highway 101, the windows rolled down just enough to let in the scent of the nearby forest, the hum of my old pickup engine beneath me, the feel of the steering wheel warm under my palms. Karen's voice pierced the morning, calling the situation urgent, yet strangely theatrical, each word calculated to draw attention from anyone within earshot, the echo bouncing off the wooden siding and into the surrounding trees. I stepped forward, letting the gravel shift and crunch under my boots, my eyes scanning the calm lake beyond, where the water lapped gently at the dock, unaware of the drama unfolding just meters away. My mind flickered to the folder tucked under my arm, the crisp paper of my land ownership documents slightly rustling as I shifted my weight, a subtle reassurance that I was not just a visitor here, that this lakeside cabin, with its sun-bleached deck boards and slightly sagging railing, had my name etched into its history long before Karen decided to play judge and jury. The scent of pine mixed with the faint, almost metallic trace of morning dew on the leaves around us, grounding me in the reality that this was my place, my refuge, and that the authority she wielded so aggressively was, in fact, built on nothing more than assumption. I felt the soft breeze brush against my cheeks, carrying the distant calls of loons and the low rumble of the water against the pilings, each sound layering over the tension in the air, making it almost cinematic, like a scene suspended between confrontation and revelation. Karen's foot tapped impatiently, the nails of her fingers digging into the phone as she seemed ready to escalate at the slightest sign of resistance, and yet I held my ground, letting the quiet authority of my knowledge fill the space between us, each second stretching out as if the lake itself had paused to witness the unfolding scene. I could see the faint smudge of ink on my documents, a reminder of the legal power quietly resting in my hands, something invisible yet tangible, something Karen had overlooked entirely in her rush to impose control. The sun climbed higher, warming the boards beneath my boots, the smell of resin mixing with damp wood, and for a moment, I allowed myself a small, private smile, knowing that what she didn't yet realize would soon shift the balance completely, that the subtle details of paper, proof, and presence were more potent than her shouting, more enduring than her frantic calls to 911. And as I inhaled the crisp morning air one last time before stepping fully onto the porch, I silently relished the approaching moment when the weight of justice would quietly, inevitably, land where it belonged. The air between us thickened as Karen continued speaking, her words sharp and deliberate, each syllable echoing against the wooden panels of the porch, yet I remained rooted in place, feeling the coarse texture of the deck beneath my fingers and the subtle warmth of the sun creeping along the boards. The distant water lapped softly against the dock, a rhythmic counterpoint to the tension that seemed to hang over the small clearing, the scent of pine and fresh lake water mingling with the faint aroma of spilled coffee from my thermos, forgotten on the railing. I shifted my weight slightly, letting the gravel crunch under my boots, a deliberate sound meant to claim presence without confrontation, and I watched the way her eyes flickered toward the folder under my arm, though she did not acknowledge it aloud, her focus still on the imagined authority of her voice and the call she had placed. The breeze picked up, carrying the subtle rustle of leaves and the low hum of insects, layering natural sound over human discord, and I allowed myself a moment to notice the tiny details. The chipped paint along the railing, the shimmer of dew on the grass near the edge of the lake, the faint creak of the cabin as it settled into the earth. I spoke quietly, my words deliberate and measured, emphasizing clarity over volume, drawing attention not to anger but to fact, letting the cadence of my voice carry over the ambient noises, letting each point land with calm authority. Karen hesitated, and in that pause, the tension momentarily shifted, the imagined dominance faltering as her gaze darted toward the legal papers she had not anticipated, her posture stiffening as if the weight of unseen rules had suddenly pressed upon her shoulders. The sun climbed higher, glinting off the water in a way that made each small wave sparkle, a reminder of the constancy of place, of history, of the tangible truth that no amount of shouting could alter the simple fact that I had every right to stand there. I inhaled deeply, drawing in the cool air scented with pine resin and damp earth, grounding myself in reality, letting that sensation reinforce the steadiness of my stance. Each sound, the distant call of a loon, the subtle rustle of small wildlife in the underbrush, the gentle slap of water against the dock, blended into a serene counterpoint to the brewing human conflict, providing a soundtrack that underscored both calm and authority. Karen shifted again, her voice faltering slightly as she searched for leverage that was not there, her hand tightening unconsciously on the railing, and I took a careful step forward, presenting the folder in plain sight, the crisp edges of the documents catching the sunlight, proof unassailable yet delivered with quiet composure. Time seemed to slow as the reality of ownership, of rightful presence, settled into the space between us, the ambient sounds of the lake and forest providing a gentle, natural confirmation that I was where I belonged, and that authority grounded in law and reason would ultimately prevail over impulsive calls and assumptions. I noticed the hesitation in her stance, the slight shift of weight from one foot to the other, and I knew that the presence of the documents in my hand carried more weight than her raised voice, more influence than the imagined authority of a phone call to the local dispatch. The air smelled faintly of wet moss and the lingering tang of early morning dew, each inhale reinforcing a calm confidence that contrasted sharply with the rigid posture she maintained, her fingers tightening unconsciously on the railing as though it could anchor her certainty in place. I stepped closer, the gravel beneath my boots crunching in a measured rhythm, each sound a quiet assertion of presence and control, the wooden boards beneath my feet resonating subtly with my movement, grounding me to the place that was legally and rightfully mine. Across the porch, Karen's eyes flickered toward the edge of the folder, the sunlight glinting off the crisp edges of the documents, her mind racing as she weighed the new information against the authority she had assumed, yet the words she opened her mouth to speak faltered, caught somewhere between indignation and disbelief. I spoke slowly, articulating each phrase with clarity, the natural cadence of my voice blending with the gentle lapping of the lake, the distant call of a loon punctuating the morning air, the subtle creak of the cabin adding texture to the moment, emphasizing fact over emotion, letting reason settle over assumption. The smell of pine resin and damp earth seemed to fill my lungs, anchoring each word with a physical reminder of belonging, of permanence, a sensory confirmation of the rights outlined in the paper I held. I gestured slightly toward the cabin, letting the morning sunlight illuminate the deck boards, the faded paint, the evidence of care and maintenance, each detail a silent testament to ownership, a history not easily disputed by a rush to judgment or a loud accusation. Karen shifted again, her hand brushing the phone instinctively, a nervous tick that betrayed uncertainty, and I noticed the subtle tension in her shoulders, the slight narrowing of her eyes, the way her breathing became more measured as she absorbed the reality she had overlooked. I let the moment stretch, each second layered with the calm sounds of nature. Around us, the lake's gentle motion, the rustle of leaves stirred by a cool breeze, the distant hum of insects moving through the undergrowth, all reinforcing the unspoken truth that legality, preparation, and patience could outweigh assumed power and improvised authority. The sun continued to rise, casting long reflections across the water, a visual reminder that clarity and illumination often revealed what had been obscured, that the weight of fact was heavier than the weight of anger, and that the serenity of place could not be ignored, no matter how loudly one attempted to assert dominance. I took another measured step, letting the documents shift slightly in my grip, the sound of paper against my palm crisp and deliberate, a reminder that the proof of ownership was tangible, undeniable, ready to guide the unfolding resolution, and in that moment, I felt a quiet confidence settle over the porch, a certainty that the balance of control had begun to tip, and that the lake, the cabin, and the morning itself bore witness to the subtle yet undeniable shift in power. The tension seemed to hover like the morning mist over the lake as I carefully placed the folder on the railing, letting the sunlight catch the edges of the papers, the faint rustle of each sheet punctuating the quiet symphony of nature surrounding us. Karen Whitmore blinked, her expression flickering between disbelief and frustration, the gentle sway of the trees casting moving shadows across her face that softened the rigidity of her posture just slightly. The water lapped at the dock with a rhythmic consistency, a soothing counterpoint to the escalating awareness of reality settling over the porch, and I could feel the subtle shift in air pressure, the faint breeze tugging at my shirt and ruffling my hair, carrying the scent of damp earth and resin into every inhale. I spoke with a measured tone, deliberate and calm, highlighting the facts with a clarity that left no room for misinterpretation, letting each word land with the weight of reason, each pause a silent reminder that preparation and patience often outlast aggression. Her hand hovered near the phone, as if ready to summon assistance once more, yet hesitation lingered in her movements, betraying a dawning recognition that authority cannot override documented ownership, that shouted commands are weaker than written proof. The sunlight reflected off the water, glinting in the ripples like tiny diamonds, illuminating the small scratches and weathered spots on the porch where time and care had left tangible marks of my long-standing presence. I adjusted my stance slightly, letting the gravel underfoot shift with a soft crunch, a grounding sensation that reminded me of every mile driven to arrive here, every choice that had led to this calm assertion of rightful presence, the natural scents and sounds around me reinforcing the certainty that I belong. Karen's eyes flicked repeatedly between the folder and the lake, a subtle sign of her internal struggle, a silent negotiation with herself as she weighed the reality she had overlooked against the scenario she had assumed to be in control of. The gentle creak of the cabin settling into the foundation echoed faintly beneath us, harmonizing with the rustle of leaves and the soft splash of water against the pilings, layering a soundtrack of permanence and natural rhythm over human discord, each sound amplifying the contrast between assumption and fact. I gestured lightly toward the cabin, emphasizing the continuity of my presence, the weathered but well-maintained boards, the subtle details that spoke to long-term stewardship rather than temporary claim, each visual cue reinforcing the truth held within the documents resting on the railing. The breeze carried the distant calls of wildlife, the low hum of cicadas, and the subtle scent of lake water mixing with pine resin, all elements coalescing into a sensory reminder that the space itself bore witness to history and ownership, that the balance of authority had quietly, yet irrevocably, begun to favor the rightful occupant. Karen's lips parted as if to argue again, but the words faltered, her posture relaxing imperceptibly, the imagined power diminishing in the face of indisputable reality, and I could sense the slow but inevitable recognition that the morning, the lake, and the cabin all silently aligned with truth and preparation, a quiet affirmation that justice, grounded in fact and calm perseverance, was prevailing without a single raised hand or sharp word. The morning sun climbed higher, casting a golden glow across the cabin and reflecting off the gentle ripples of the lake, illuminating every detail of the weathered deck and the carefully arranged chairs that lined the porch. I adjusted the folder in my hands, feeling the crisp edges and the subtle weight of the documents that confirmed my ownership, a tangible reassurance in contrast to the tense uncertainty radiating from Karen Whitmore. Her posture shifted, shoulders tight, hands lightly gripping the railing as if the wood itself could offer some grounding, yet her eyes betrayed the dawning awareness that her assumption of control was misplaced. I spoke with deliberate calm, each word measured, carrying clarity over confrontation, explaining points that were simple yet undeniable, letting the rhythm of my voice intertwine with the sounds of nature, the soft lapping of water against the pilings, the distant cry of a loon, the rustle of leaves stirred by the wind, to underscore the gravity of the facts in a setting that contrasted so starkly with human tension. The scent of pine resin and lake water filled the air, mingling with the faint aroma of morning coffee that lingered from my thermos on the railing, each inhale reinforcing presence and authority, grounding me in the reality of rightful ownership. I gestured lightly toward the cabin itself, highlighting the subtle wear that spoke to years of stewardship, the carefully maintained details that told a history impossible to erase with mere words or a hurried phone call. Karen hesitated, her gaze flicking repeatedly between the papers and the serene lake, the uncertainty growing as she absorbed the quiet but resolute assurance in my stance. I let silence stretch, knowing that each passing second, filled with the ambient sounds of the environment, served to reinforce the undeniable truth, the calm power of preparation over the fleeting force of assumption. The sun glinted off the water, tiny sparkles dancing across the surface, a visual affirmation of constancy and fact, contrasting with the tense rigidity of her posture and faltering voice. Every detail, from the crunch of gravel underfoot to the subtle sway of the trees, worked in concert to frame the situation, making clear that the rightful occupant was present, grounded, and informed, and that the balance of authority was slowly but inevitably shifting in my favor. Karen's lips parted as if to argue again, yet no words formed, the weight of reality pressing in, the quiet presence of law and ownership settling over the porch in a way that no raised voice could undo, leaving only the sound of the lake, the forest, and a calm assurance that patience and preparation would see truth upheld. The morning continued to unfold, warm light spreading across every surface, each reflection and shadow adding dimension to the scene, reinforcing the subtle yet unmistakable message that rightful stewardship was not just a matter of paper, but of presence, history, and a steady, unshakable confidence. The tension on the porch seemed to ease slightly as I allowed the folder to rest fully on the railing, its contents catching the sunlight in a way that drew the eye without a single word, the crisp edges of the documents reflecting authority quietly but undeniably. Karen Whitmore shifted her gaze to the lake, the gentle movement of water creating a calming backdrop to the otherwise charged scene, the soft sounds of the environment, the distant calls of birds, the subtle rustle of leaves, the faint slap of water against the dock, providing a rhythm that contrasted with the hesitation in her stance. I inhaled the rich scent of pine resin mixed with the fresh, slightly earthy aroma of the lake, letting each breath reinforce a sense of grounded certainty, and I noticed the way the sunlight highlighted the imperfections and care in the cabin boards, evidence of long-term presence and responsibility that no hurried assertion could erase. My voice broke the quiet with calm, deliberate explanations, each word articulated with clarity, emphasizing fact over emotion, the natural cadence blending with the ambient sounds to underscore the legitimacy of my claim without confrontation, allowing the environment itself to amplify the reason in my words. Karen's fingers brushed against the railing again, a subtle tension betraying the realization that she had underestimated the situation, that the quiet power of preparation and evidence held more sway than raised voices or hurried assumptions. I gestured slightly toward the folder, letting the sunlight glint across its surface, a subtle signal of readiness and authority, while my other hand rested lightly on the railing, connecting me physically to the space and visually to the history embedded in the cabin. The breeze shifted, carrying the scent of wet earth and distant wildflowers, a reminder of the serenity that surrounds rightful ownership, each sensory detail reinforcing the calm certainty that permeated the porch. Karen's posture softened imperceptibly, her breathing more measured, eyes tracking the slight movements of my hands and the way the light fell across the scene, a quiet acknowledgement forming that presence combined with proof outweighs impulsive claims. I took a slow step forward, the gravel crunching beneath my boots a gentle assertion of place, each sound deliberate, echoing subtly into the wooded area beyond, while the lake mirrored the soft, steady morning light, a reflective confirmation of constancy and endurance. The subtle swaying of the trees cast moving shadows across the deck, adding depth to the space, each rustle a natural punctuation, reinforcing the stability and permanence that contrasted with the fleeting force of assumed control. I allowed the moment to stretch, letting silence coexist with the layered sounds of the environment, confident that the truth in my hands and the quiet composure I projected would gradually settle the uncertainty that had previously dominated the porch, and that the lake, the cabin, and the morning itself bore witness to a shift in balance, favoring reason, patience, and rightful ownership over impulsive judgment. The subtle shift in energy on the porch became almost tangible as I allowed my gaze to sweep over the lake, the sunlight dancing across the gentle ripples, highlighting the silver sheen of early morning on the water. Karen Whitmore remained on the porch, her posture tense but restrained, the initial force of her assumptions slowly giving way to hesitation, a quiet acknowledgement that the situation was no longer guided by impulse but by the undeniable presence of fact. I adjusted the folder slightly, the rustle of paper soft but crisp, each movement intentional, a visual signal of preparedness and authority that contrasted with the uncertainty lingering in her expression. The smell of pine and damp earth filled my senses, mingling with the faint aroma of aged wood from the cabin, a grounding sensory backdrop as the distant calls of birds punctuated the morning air, layering the scene with a calm natural rhythm. I spoke deliberately, the cadence steady, emphasizing clarity and truth, each syllable measured to resonate with the surrounding calm rather than confront it, allowing the authority of the documentation and the unshakable knowledge of rightful ownership to carry the weight rather than any elevated tone or forceful gesture. Karen's eyes flicked repeatedly toward the folder, and then toward the lake, the reflection of sunlight on the water casting shifting patterns across her face, highlighting the dawning realization that authority could not be assumed without understanding, that evidence and preparation held far more sway than the urgency of a phone call. I took a careful step forward, gravel shifting softly beneath my boots, the movement subtle yet deliberate, grounding me physically to the cabin and visually reinforcing a presence that could not be dismissed. The gentle creak of the cabin, the subtle sway of the trees, the soft lap of water against the dock, all layered together to form a natural accompaniment to the human dynamics on the porch, each element echoing the quiet assertion of rightful claim. I let the silence stretch just long enough to allow the weight of presence and proof to permeate the space, confident that the ambient sounds and the steady warmth of sunlight would reinforce the clarity of reality against the backdrop of assumption. Karen's posture softened further, her hand loosening slightly on the railing, her gaze no longer fixed in defiance but in contemplation, absorbing the facts that had been present all along but previously overlooked. The mixture of natural elements, the fresh lake breeze, the subtle scent of pine resin, the soft hum of the forest around us, interwove with the visual confirmation of ownership in the documents, the care taken with the cabin, and the measured, calm presence I projected, creating an unspoken dialogue that communicated authority and truth more effectively than any argument. Each moment passed deliberately, the lake reflecting the rising sun, the shadows of the trees stretching across the porch, and I knew that the subtle shift had taken hold, that patience, preparation, and undeniable fact had begun to tip the balance, leaving only quiet acknowledgement and the serene affirmation of rightful presence in their wake. The morning air shifted subtly, carrying the fresh scent of the lake mingled with the earthy aroma of pine needles and damp soil, a sensory backdrop that underscored the quiet unfolding of understanding between us. Karen Whitmore's expression had softened further, a mixture of hesitation and dawning realization playing across her features as she glanced down at the folder now resting firmly on the railing, sunlight glinting off the crisp edges of the documents that confirmed every word I had calmly spoken. I took a measured step forward, the gravel under my boots producing a soft, deliberate crunch that echoed slightly in the stillness, reinforcing my presence without raising a voice, letting every small movement communicate certainty and control. The cabin itself seemed to breathe with us, the subtle creak of the wooden boards beneath our feet harmonizing with the gentle rustle of leaves stirred by the morning breeze, the low hum of insects from the surrounding forest adding texture to the serene yet tense scene. I allowed my eyes to sweep over the calm lake, the sunlight sparkling across its surface like scattered diamonds, and in that brief reflection of natural beauty I sensed the transition of energy, the way the balance of awareness was shifting in my favor, imperceptible yet undeniable. Karen's lips parted as if to speak, yet no words formed, the weight of evidence and the clarity of fact filling the space between us more powerfully than any argument could. I gestured slightly toward the cabin, toward the carefully maintained details that spoke to years of stewardship, the subtle wear on the railing, the meticulously cleaned windows, the evidence of care that could not be fabricated or dismissed, each visual cue reinforcing the quiet authority I carried. The breeze stirred again, bringing with it the faint scent of wildflowers from the surrounding hillside and the unmistakable crispness of early morning, intertwining with the subtle lapping of water against the dock to create a natural rhythm that supported the calm certainty of the moment. Every inhale of fresh air, every glance at the shimmering lake, every faint creak of the cabin seemed to confirm that the space itself bore witness to rightful ownership, that presence, preparation, and clarity had the power to outweigh assumed control and impulsive authority. I allowed the silence to linger just long enough for the weight of observation, of fact, and of reason to permeate, my posture steady, my gaze confident, the documents in my hand a tangible assertion of truth that required no loud proclamation. Karen's fingers loosened further on the railing, her stance relaxing imperceptibly as the realization fully sank in, her eyes tracing the lines of the cabin and the sparkling water beyond, a quiet acceptance settling over her as the balance tipped unmistakably toward rightful presence. The sunlight shifted subtly across the porch, casting moving shadows that danced across the wooden boards and illuminated the folder, a visual confirmation that authority grounded in fact and patience had achieved its place, leaving only calm acknowledgement in its wake, the lake, the forest, and the morning itself serving as witnesses to the subtle yet irreversible shift in understanding. The morning had fully arrived, sunlight pouring over the lake and casting long, warm reflections across the porch and cabin walls, each beam highlighting the weathered wood and carefully maintained details that spoke of years of care and rightful ownership. I held the folder firmly, feeling the weight of both paper and certainty in my hands, the crisp edges catching the light as if to punctuate the truth I carried. Karen Whitmore stepped back slightly, her gaze tracing the documents and then the cabin, the subtle furrow of her brows softening as the realization fully settled in, a quiet understanding replacing the earlier tension. The lake mirrored the sky, gentle waves glimmering like scattered silver, each ripple reinforcing a sense of continuity and permanence, a natural confirmation that patience, preparation, and rightful presence held sway over assumption and impulsive actions. I spoke with calm authority, my words deliberate and measured, emphasizing clarity, fact, and reason, allowing the rhythm of my voice to blend with the ambient sounds of nature, the soft rustle of leaves, the faint calls of distant birds, the low hum of water against the dock, creating a layered backdrop that underscored the weight of undeniable truth. Karen's hands relaxed completely, her stance shifting from confrontation to observation, the subtle tension melting as she absorbed the quiet, unassailable reality of ownership and authority before her. I gestured toward the cabin, the details of its age, care, and maintenance evident under the morning light, each visual cue reinforcing the legitimacy of my presence and the depth of responsibility embedded in every board and railing. The breeze carried the mingled scents of pine resin, damp earth, and lake water, refreshing and grounding, each inhale strengthening the calm certainty that surrounded the scene. I allowed a slow, deliberate pause, letting the natural sounds and the steady sunlight work in concert with the visual and legal proof, solidifying a sense of inevitability that no words or raised voice could undo. Karen's lips parted as if to speak, yet no assertion came, only quiet acknowledgement. Her posture softened, and her eyes reflected a dawning respect for the undeniable fact of rightful ownership, the authority rooted in preparation rather than impulsive action. The cabin, the lake, and the surrounding trees seemed to embrace the resolution, the gentle movement of water and swaying leaves harmonizing with the stillness of the moment, reinforcing the balance that had shifted, the calm authority prevailing without a single act of aggression. I allowed myself a subtle exhale, feeling the quiet satisfaction of justice quietly restored, the evidence, presence, and measured patience confirming that the rightful order had been maintained, and that the morning, with all its sounds, scents, and light, bore witness to the resolution, leaving only serenity and the quiet acknowledgement of truth.